great to be speaking to you today on this special occasion. Fantastic to have you here. Let me say, especially if you are a guest and if it is your first time here, you are extra specially welcome. My just glamorous assistant is just bringing something up for me. Thank you very much, Matt. Not sure the wolf whistle was necessary, but yeah, that's all right. Great. Well, if you've been with us for the last kind of 4 weeks or so, we have been in a series where we've been looking at, sorry, they're just trying to do something with my voice. I think I slept funny and it's gone down a few octaves, so hopefully you can still make out what I'm saying. But yeah, we've been looking at what is the church. It's the big question we've been asking. And we're concluding our series today. We've been looking at some of the key essentials that we need to prioritize and embody if we're to be the people that God is calling us to be. I'm just going to press on. One of the beautiful things about the church is its diversity and its variety. But what happens is when you have diversity and variety is that you also have a lot of diversity of preferences. Lots of different preferences. For as many as there are people in the room, you can have preferences. Things like length of services, things like sung worship style, preaching style, approaches to kids provision. The list goes on about the things that we might preference over one over the other. And let me just say, it's really fine to have preferences. I think we said this at the very start. However, we're doing this series because really we want to be able to submit our preferences to these biblical priorities. That's what we want to be as the church. We want to have biblical priorities, and we don't want our preferences to trump those. That would definitely be kind of the tail wagging the dog, if you like. That's not what we want. We're also doing this series because we have new people. You might notice this. We have new people with us all the time, which is super exciting, but we don't want to assume that as you come in new on the journey that you're on, that you kind of know what's important to us and why, and that you're coming in with a load of kind of already pre-knowledge. So we actually want to lay out some things that we're saying as a church are really important to us at Mosaic, in this church, and also in the churches that by God's grace, hopefully we'll go on to plant as we see new churches started. So here's what we've looked at so far. Hopefully you have, as you came in, been given a little pen, which is pretty hard to hold, I'll be honest. Mine is easier to hold. But you've got a little blue pen, you've got a bit of paper, and we've been kind of sketching out this kind of diagram, this journey of where we've been, if we go to the next slide. And I'm going to kind of make a little attempt to show you where we've been going as we kind of just do a very brief recap. So firstly, we looked at the fact that by grace, we follow Jesus as our Lord and Saviour. Can you see this all right? Does everyone just about make that out? So by grace, we follow Jesus as our Lord and Saviour. That, my friends, is a crown. Okay, you got that one? Draw it with me. Then we looked at the fact that we are fully devoted followers of Jesus, people who hear and obey. So you draw this with me. Don't leave me on my own, guys. The angle makes it harder, I promise. There we go, fully devoted followers of Jesus. And then we looked at the fact that we're a people of word and spirit. So the word, the Bible's authority, it's really important. Like it's the thing that's above our lives. We follow it. It's trustworthy. It's true. It's the ground beneath our feet, as well as the North Star, if you like. It's really important. But also we're a people of the Spirit. We're a people of the Holy Spirit, and we listen to his voice, and we hear, and we obey. Here we go. It's always hard to do a book. There we go. We're people of the word, and this, I think, is one of the harder ones. No, I've done that wrong. This is meant to be a flame. Oh, there we go. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. I'm sorry, the Spirit is disappointed in me right now. No, he's not. He's my comforter, and he's my advocate. He's on my side. It's fine. But that is a terrible flame. All right, so we're people of word and spirit. Let's move on. We also, week 2, we looked at the fact we want to build a loving community. So we want to be people who display the fruit of the Spirit. Easier. And also, we want to be people who have anointed leadership operating in teams. Steve, you're not drawing, by the way. Did I give you permission to sit out? If I've got to make a fool of myself, you have as well. Okay, here we go. I'm going to move through a bit quicker now. There we go. There you go. I'll print it. And then this week, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at the fact that we are people who declare and demonstrate the kingdom of God. Declare and demonstrate the kingdom of God. And that we're also people who want to make healthy, multiplying disciples. Another harder one here, you get the message. Okay, that's what we're doing this week. And just to say that, don't worry, by the end, we're actually you can put that down, you can turn them over. And once I've given you what we're going to do today, we're going to return to this. You're going to have a go without looking. How does that sound? You're not in art class, but you're going to have a go with that. And you're going to mark the person's work next to you. So that's right. So if that induces any anxiety, you've got the whole message to worry about that one. No, I'm joking. It's not a test. But we do hope that this is helpful. We hope that this is, I guess, an image to hang some of these important priorities on. And maybe it will come to mind if someone says, what's your church really all about? Like, you might not go, oh, let me give you a PowerPoint presentation. But you might pull out a napkin, or you might say, actually, these little things, this is how, or it might just be a mental reminder for you to say some of these things. Does that make sense? So today we're exploring being a people who don't just enjoy our relationship with God, like that is a good thing, but we're also a people who share our relationship with God with others. And we're asking the big question, how can we grow in it? How can we grow in doing that? When I think about what's stopping us from thriving in this area, I don't think it's that we don't think it's important. I don't think it's that we don't think, almost we don't know what to do. I think there are just a whole host of things which almost undermine our confidence. I think there are narratives in popular culture. I think there are wrongly held beliefs, things that almost stop us sharing our faith before we've almost got started. It's like things that stop us in our tracks. In our context, in the post-Christian West, I feel like it's almost like our nation gave Christianity a shot. Like we gave it a go. If you've ever sat around with a grandparent maybe, or just kind of thought a little bit about what this nation was like 60, 70 years ago, the norm was people were in church, probably for some really good reasons, for others just because they felt they should be, but that was just the norm. And things just feel like they've moved on a long way now. We feel like we're in the minority. And then for us, for those of us who haven't moved on, you're here, You're either here because you're interested and you're exploring, you're on a journey, or you're here because you're already committed and you're already convinced. It's like we've got this job, this task of convincing a load of people who've already made their mind up, who just don't really want to know. That can be sometimes what it feels like. We still believe it's good and true, and we've got to convince everybody else that it also is too. And I think it's like almost this perception of cold call sales, that as a Christian, this is like your role almost, or what it can feel like. You've ever had that moment where we used to have house phones, didn't we? People used to ring them. It doesn't really happen that way anymore. But or when you've been walking on the street and you see somebody, got a clipboard maybe or an iPad these days, and they're stood there, and you just know that your job is like, look down, get your phone out, do anything but just plow on. Like, that is your role. But sometimes, every now and again, they just give that little smile that you're just like, you just look like a genuine person. We've made eye contact, you smile. Now I feel really rude, just like cracking on. And I'm not really in that much of a rush. No, I'd be a lie if I said I was. So anyway, you go over and you actually, but in the back of your mind, this is 30 seconds max. Like, this is me at my best. Like, I'm giving you 30 seconds. I don't want what you're selling. And I think by the look in your eye, this conversation isn't going anywhere. You've had those moments, I imagine. I've had many of them. So in those moments, I think that's somehow what it can feel like when it comes to sharing our faith. Do you relate in any way? Almost like, I know I've got some stuff, and I know deep down you need it, but I don't think you want me to tell you. And they're like, in the back of their minds, you're thinking the same. Is this really going to go anywhere? Do you relate in any way? I think that's so often almost like the position we're in, like a negative default. That's how I describe it. Like, what do we think people want to know? It's a negative default position. But I think there are some really good reasons why that doesn't have to be the case. I actually don't think it is the case. I think there are good reasons why we can be far more confident in sharing our faith than that. So here's what I want to do, if it's okay. I want to look at what's our starting point, and I want to give you 3 reasons to be confident. Then I want us to do a little bit of honest reflection, and we're going to look at what's stopping us declaring and demonstrating the kingdom on our left here. And we're going to look at some barriers and some blockages. And then I want us to lastly look at making healthy, multiplying disciples. And we're going to look at some tools and approaches. And this bit's going to be quite practical. I actually want to give you some things to almost try, some approaches and some tools. So here we go. 3 reasons to be confident. Are you ready? First reason, biblical perspective. God's not hiding. God is not hiding. In Europe, since the Enlightenment, there's been this kind of trend or narrative which I think has emerged, and it's this idea that people are looking for God out here, just in all sorts of different things. People are looking, but they can't find him, and it's almost like he's hiding, like some cosmic game of hide and seek. You played hide and seek with a child? It's like we're all playing hide and seek, and God's the one hiding. Humanity is the one looking. And now we've been looking for so long that it's almost now more plausible to think that actually God doesn't exist. We've been looking for long enough. We've searched this house, and there's no one here, this cosmic game of hide and seek. But is that the picture the Bible paints, if you know your Bible? Is that the picture the Bible paints, that God is somehow hiding from us? I don't think it is. Romans 1:18, we're going to look at a few verses here. This is where we're going to base or just begin our time. It's going to come up on the screen, or you can turn there if you would like to in your Bibles, if you've got them. This is what it says. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood for what has been made, so that people are without excuse. God's not hiding. It's very clear. He's revealed himself in everything that he has made. Dr. Dan Strange, in his recent book called Making Faith Magnetic, 5 themes that our culture cannot stop talking about. He points out that people are simultaneously running from God and running towards him almost at the same time. I know those things are hard to get your head around, but there is something happening in people's hearts and minds that they're simultaneously both doing those things almost at the same time. Running away from God, look at verse 18. People suppress the truth. Picture here somebody holding a balloon underwater. Humanity in our kind of depravity and our brokenness, it's like we try and suppress and pretend there's no God. But have you ever tried to hold a balloon underwater? Actually, what happens when you let go? It just pops up. And also, it just takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of effort. As you're holding it down, you have to work at it. You're very aware of what you're doing. You know exactly what you're doing, because if you stop, it will pop up again. People are running from God, trying to ignore the signs in creation, their conscience, all sorts of things. But at the very same time, people can't escape their need for him. They can't actually escape it, I don't think. Here's why. Verse 20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen. Paul points out these kind of divine attributes of God, eternal power, divine nature. And the idea is that God has revealed his eternal power, is that at some kind of deep level, as human beings, we are dependent creatures. We are dependent upon someone or something greater than ourselves. And everybody kind of at some very deep level just knows that. They just know it. Feelings of dependency, but also feelings of accountability. Did you notice in those verses that in verse 20 it says, we're without excuse? That if you're without excuse, it means that you have information. It points to the fact that everybody at some level knows they're accountable to somebody or something greater than themselves. Even if they can't put a name to it, they just know they're dependent and they're also accountable. So the first reason I think we have to be confident is that God isn't hiding. He's at work in all people, though they might struggle to see it or even put words to it or admit it. He isn't hiding. He's at work in their lives in some way, shape or form. And I think I start here because I think often we think our starting point is almost like -10. You know, like people are so far from wanting to know anything, like we're just like way off. But these verses say God has gone before us and he's laying a foundation and he's actually paving the way for you. That is the biblical perspective. I'm not saying it always feels like that, because I've got a few blank faces, one or two. I'm not saying it will always feel like that, but that is what Paul is saying here. That is what the Bible is encouraging us with. Second reason to have confidence is actually an emerging trend I wanted just to share with you. I think this is pretty encouraging and interesting, and that's among academics. There seems to be a resurgence in interest in God among the big thinkers, if you like, today. If you like your podcasts, you might have heard of Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man if you're into your movies, but Tom Holland from The Rest is History. And his story is fascinating. He actually wrote a book called In the Shadow of the Sword, where he critiqued from a historical perspective the Islamic worldview. And he did that, and I think it might have even been a book signing. A Muslim lady came to him, and it's this fascinating little interaction. She came and basically said, "Why have you done this to my belief? Why have you done this to my worldview? You wouldn't put your own secular worldview under this kind of scrutiny." And he kind of paused for a moment, and this lady really took him aback, because he was like, "You know what? I haven't put my own worldview under the same scrutiny." But then he said, "Actually, I should. You're probably right." And I think almost that seed was planted. He went on to write a second book, which became even more well-known, and this is called Dominion. It's about the making of the Western mind. Just if you're not into this stuff, just stay with me just for a few minutes. I know some of you are on the edge of your seat, I can tell. But basically, in this second book, he undermines his own secular worldview. So this is his belief. In this book, he undermines his own worldview, and basically he shows that all the values that he as a person, and often secular people will champion and hold dear, things like diversity, equality, compassion for the marginalized, freedom of expression, consent, progress, kindness. Actually, he unpacks over many pages the fact that they've all grown out of the roots of Christianity in the Jesus Revolution. And actually, he's not a Christian, and he's saying this. He goes back and he just looks historically, he goes, it's really hard to argue otherwise. And it's just, he's bringing this to bear, and lots of people are kind of wrestling with it and trying to work out what to do with it. You've also got someone like Jordan Peterson, who can be a bit of a divisive character. Whatever your thoughts on him, he's like selling out arenas, teaching through books of the Bible, and young men particularly, and lots of people who aren't flocking into our churches, they're flocking to hear what he's got to say about Exodus, as he does 3 hours on it. Like, what is going on here? This is really interesting. He's doing it unapologetically. Again, he's not a Christian, very open to the idea of God. Who knows where he actually stands at the moment? But people are coming to hear. You've also got this fascinating lady called Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She, her story very briefly, she rejected her Islamic worldview. She grew up in Somalia, and she became a very outspoken humanist. She was a critic of all religion. She kept company with people like Richard Dawkins, famous atheists, Sam Harris, even more recent famous atheists. And she was one of these kind of like leading thinkers in this space. And very recently, somebody asked her, even though you don't believe in God, can I ask, if you were to believe in God, what type of God would you believe in? Like, who would be worthy of your worship? And she did this interesting thing. She made a list. And she made a list, and then she looked at it, and then she realized, she said, if I was really honest with myself, as I reflected on my list over the coming days, this list describes already a worldview, and not just a worldview. This list describes a person. This list describes Jesus. And she looked at her list, looked at all the characteristics, and she suddenly realized that this list she was looking at with Jesus She's gone on to become a Christian. She wrote a recent article. She got loads of flack from her team, if you like, all the people who were kind of, standing side by side with her. She's kind of now turned and is pursuing Christianity. And this is what she said in a recent article. I've turned to Christianity because I've ultimately found life without any spiritual solace unendurable and self-destructive. Atheism failed to answer a simple question: what is the meaning and purpose of life? If you want to know any more about that, there's a guy called Justin Briley. He's wrote a book called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, and he charts loads of these kind of trends, themes, and people's stories. But anyway, you might say, okay, semi-interesting, Rich. Some of you hopefully found it more so. But that's just academics, isn't it? That's the big thinkers. Like, what about the average person at the school gate where I am? What about my neighbour? What about my colleague? What about the person on my course? Like, what about the person in my sports team? Like, are we seeing a similar trend emerging? And I want to say the third reason to be confident is yes, surprisingly. It's not going to be no. The third reason to be confident is yes. Research shows that there's a growing openness to Jesus in the UK. And normally it's very hard for us to kind of equate that or put any kind of numbers to that. It's very anecdotal. You just go, okay, who have I met? Like, lick your finger, put it in the air. Like, who actually knows if that's true? But recently there's been a survey, large sample size, 4,000 people, representative across the UK, and it's called the Talking Jesus Survey, where they basically looked at what do people really think about Jesus, the church, and evangelism, so people sharing their faith with them. And it gives, I think, some super helpful insights, and I want to share a few, because I think it does give us reason to be more confident. So here's a few stats. 48, just as a baseline, 48% of the UK describes themselves as Christian, but only 6% of that would say they're practicing Christians, so like committed to a church and would actually say, I'm a practicing Christian. Others would kind of more culturally maybe or nominally. So here's a few. When asked about the resurrection, they said, these were kind of Dropbox thing. They said, I believe the resurrection of Jesus from the dead happened, word for word, as described in the Bible. I believe the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, but that the story in the Bible contains some content which should not be taken literally. And I do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, or I don't know. Okay, I don't know for time. I don't know where you think the weight would be. But let me show you. Let's have a next slide, please. So, have a look at that for a second and just let that compute. What that actually means is that 45% of people ticked a box saying that they believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Some of them, maybe that there's some bits in the Bible we can't take in literally, but they believe that actually it happened. 45% of people, even though I've just told you only 6% are practicing Christians. So that's quite crazy. It must mean that though they actually think that that's true, they haven't done anything with that information maybe, it hasn't informed their life. They're not saying, I now call myself a Christian, or I now want to follow Jesus. But they are open to saying, I think that could actually be true. What do they think about us as individuals? What do they think about you? Let's have a little look. They were asked this question. We've got the blue, which is all fairly positive, and we've got the orange, which is a lot more negative. Do you think the weight is in the orange or the blue? What do you think? Hands up for orange. Few hands, glass half full. Hands up for the blue. Okay. Well, let's have a look. There you go. I think there's some reasons to be encouraged here. Let's have a look, though. This is a bit more challenging. I've kind of given the game away there. But let's have a look about what they think of the church. So that was you as an individual. But when asked about the organization, when asked about the institution, what do you think? Do you think the weight is going to be in the blue, or do you think the weight is in the orange? Yeah. Let's have a look. Okay, so it is in the orange. Narrow-minded, you're hypocritical, okay? Some of these things. But there is still some in the blue, like the third largest is friendly, that the church is actually friendly, and there's some other positive things there. I'm just going to, just a very quick comment. I think it's much easier to almost think negatively about an institution, a faceless organisation, that is a person who's making tea for them at their desk. That's what's kind of going on there, I think. I think these stats also help us, and they show us that actually friendship evangelism, so you sharing your faith just in an everyday way, is a brilliant bridge still. That's what that shows us, that they're very open to you as a person who's living out your faith, hopefully with integrity and speaking about him and showing him from your actions. So how are the conversations actually going? So that's about what they think about us, but do they want to know about what you believe? That's how they feel about you. Do they actually want to know what you believe? Do they want you to share it with them? Let's have a quick look. From this next one, we can see, I'll just summarize it for you. 75%, that's 3/4 of non-Christians, felt comfortable during a conversation about faith. 33%, so a third, because of the conversation, wanted to know more about Jesus. And bottom right, 36% of people were open to an encounter or experience of Jesus for themselves. And after the conversation, that's about a third. So I think that's really interesting. Is that your perception as you go to initiate conversations with people, as you go to share your faith? Are you thinking actually that, as you say, if you do it 3 times, are you thinking that one of these people wants to have an encounter or an experience with Jesus? I think there's reasons to be very encouraged here. There's reasons to be on the front foot, not on the back foot. So I want us to now just think a little bit about what's stopping us from declaring and demonstrating the kingdom. Because if that's how open we are, what's actually stopping us? Why aren't we seeing more people in our churches? Why aren't we seeing more people coming to faith? Well, people may be open, but are we making the most of our opportunities? I know some of you will feel super motivated, like you've had lots of conversations, you regularly have lots of conversations. Others of us are less on the front foot, if we're really honest. Maybe we haven't had a conversation about Jesus with somebody, an acquaintance or a friend, for a really long time. Like if you're just sitting here just being really honest, like when was the last time I went there? When was the last time I took an opportunity? And listen, this is not about a message about guilt, trying to guilt or shame or say, you just should be doing it more. That's not what this is about. But I do want us to almost put our finger on some of the barriers. I want us to do that so we can bring them to God and ask him to shine his light on what some of those barriers actually are. From personal experience, talking to people over the years, I see a few things. These are some of the things that I see and experience for myself. The first lot, I would say, are almost like the things, the ice under the iceberg. All right, these are to do with our inner heart motivations. Apathy. There's a lack of desire, I think, I see and I feel. Like motivation. Like I know I should, but if I'm honest, I just can't really be bothered. Like there are other things like that are concerning me, and it just feels like a lot of effort. Awkwardness. This British desire to never make anything awkward. Like you kind of know that there's cultural rules, like don't talk about religion and politics. Like we all know that that's trotted out, and we're like, so therefore I'm breaking this cultural rule. And I'm in a conversation. It's actually going quite well. And actually, I'm quite enjoying this conversation. I don't want to kill this conversation. And if I take an opportunity here, it might kill the conversation. And I don't want to do that. So you don't. Fear. I'm scared of being rejected. Like, I just don't. I want to be liked. I want to be liked. Do you want to be liked? I want to be liked. I think we all want to be liked. I think that's just the reality. I don't want to be rejected. And I don't want to be misunderstood. I hate being misunderstood. If I actually think this, and I want you to know why I think it, but I'm going to share it and you're going to think he thinks it because of this. I'm like, no, it wasn't that. So many opportunities to be misunderstood. I don't want to be misunderstood. I want to be liked. I want to be accepted. I want to be approved of. Comfort. Comfort is huge, isn't it? Like, I just want to stay in my comfort zone. And I know that at some level, like the gospel is really brilliant, fantastic news, because I wouldn't believe it if it wasn't. Like, it's changed my life. But at another level, the gospel's also really confronted my life. My motivations. It's confronted me in all sorts of ways. There's been some painful moments in my journey of discipleship. And I know that, that's going to be the case for the person I share it with. There might be confrontation even in the conversation, and I don't really want that. I want comfort, so we avoid it. Functional atheists. Here's what I mean. I think sometimes we can be so distracted by what's in front of us that actually we forget almost that spiritual matters are very real. That spiritual matters are as real as the physical things in front of us. But we we almost just don't live that way. We're not awake to the reality that people are heading towards an eternity without Jesus. Are we awake to that every day? We believe it. Like if I actually had you down and asked you some questions, you'd be like, yeah, I believe that. But actually, does that belief fuel an urgency in the everydayness of life? Or are we just kind of going about the mundane things so often? Which of those rings most true for you? Maybe just have a little reflection. I know I've resonated with all of them, I would honestly say, at different points of my life. Like some of them more a long time ago, others of them more now. It fluctuates, but I would honestly say that I resonate with all of them. I'm sure you do too at some level. Then there's the ice above the iceberg. This is the stuff that's a bit more easy to admit to. Like it's not about our heart, it's about our kind of skill, if you like. So sometimes we can feel under-equipped. Like, I'm just not sure I have the tools to do a good job of sharing my faith. Like, no one's really taught me how to do it, and I don't think I'm going to do a good job. If I'm not going to do a good job, then I don't want to do it. Like, why do it if I'm not going to do a good job? So I'm not going to do that. Or we're out of practice. Like, sharing our faith is a gift, but it's also a skill. It's something you can get better at. So actually, like any muscle, if you don't use it, it's not going to get stronger. You've got to sharpen the saw. Like, you've got to build the muscle. It takes practice. So with those things in mind, I didn't want to just leave you with research, with emerging trends, but actually, in theory, I wanted to leave you with some things you can do that you can actually put into practice. I think what I've just shared probably does require some thought and some reflection, probably not now, but if you made a list or took a picture, you might want to go and just say, God, which of these do you want to tackle? But now I'm going to move and I want to give you a few practical things. If we're going to make healthy multiplying disciples, if we're going to actually see more than just ones and twos coming to know Jesus, if we're going to see the gospel spread further and faster than we're currently seeing, I think it's going to take everyone being involved. Okay? Not just the gifted few, and we go, we'll pray for them, but it's not me. I think it's going to take everyone being involved. And if it's going to take everyone being involved, it's going to take everyone feeling equipped and prepared. Because otherwise we're not going to want to be involved if we're not feeling equipped and prepared. So a really simple question I want to start with is, are we in contexts with people who don't know Jesus? Like that is like the beginning point. Because if you're not, it's quite hard to have a go at taking opportunities. You've got to be in contexts with those who don't know Jesus. In the survey that we looked at, there was a how well do they know us question. And 53% said they knew a practicing Christian. 53%. But that also means that 42% didn't know a practicing Christian. That's quite a sad stat, isn't it? Like 42%, even if they were super hungry, suddenly they awoke with a spiritual hunger in the morning, they wouldn't know who to talk to. Third spaces, so this is places that it's not your home, it's not your workplace, or it's not your home and it's not your school, but it's those are the places we generally spend most of our time. A third space is really important. Generally, the younger you are, the bigger your circle of friends is. I don't know if that's depressing to you or not, if you've noticed that recently. But the younger you are, you have a lot of acquaintances, you have a lot of friends, whether it's uni or work or different things. You've got a lot more time, all of those things. So I think the older we get, the more strategic we have to be with actually being in people's lives, depending on your kind of interests. So it might be that you need to join a book club, it might be that you need to join a sports team, or it might be that you just see where you are, like the school gate is an everyday opportunity. You spend 10 minutes there dropping off, 10 minutes picking up. Excuse me. It might be that that's the space, almost you need to be more intentional. Toddler groups, allotment communities, the list goes on. Maybe you could think, like, what is it for me? A, do I have one? And B, am I being intentional in it? But then once we are in it, as I've just said, the next step is being intentional. And one of the things I think we need to do first is gauge people's openness to God. So the New Testament uses this language of people of peace, finding people of peace who are almost ready to receive the gospel, the good news. It's this idea that he's already working in some people's lives already, as we've already thought about and looked at. So gauging openness, how do you find out where people are at? I want to give you a really good, solid question, okay? Somebody once said, this question has never failed me in a conversation. And I thought, liar. I thought, I'm going to try it myself. And actually, it's true. Every time I've asked this question, have you ever had any faith of any kind? That is a great question. It's a great question because the bar is so low. It's such an open question. Do you see that that's a really good question? Have you ever had any, like this much or this much, any faith of any kind? And every time I've asked that question, it's the conversation has gone in different ways, but it's opened the conversation up. It hasn't shut it down. It's non-threatening. Don't talk at cross purposes. So this is quite important. If you've ever had a conversation with anyone and brought up God, or God's been in the conversation, or you've just been privy to it, you're in a group, and suddenly you've just noticed an immediate, real negative, aggressive response just to the idea, like totally not interested. I think this is because there are many things that are good about having a heritage of Christianity in this culture. There are many things that's good about it, but one of the things that isn't good is that I think people have often heard half the story. They've heard half of the good news. Or maybe they've just heard the bad news and not the good news that makes, that's the reality. Often people have heard about sin, but they haven't heard about grace. Or they've heard about God's desire for purity, but they don't know the one who comes to live in you to enable you to live that life in the first place. People have half the news, not all of it. And I think it's really important that we clarify people's definition of God. Like, what's their view of Christianity actually based on in the first place? Like, I've got an old friend, he's called Russell Leeds. I haven't seen him in close to 20 years. If somebody came to me and said, this guy Russell, like, you know him, don't you? He's done some terrible things to me, like, da-da-da. Like, I haven't seen this guy in years. What am I going to do? Am I going to jump to defend him? Or am I going to make sure that we're talking about the same person? I'm going to pause, and I'm going to make sure that we're still talking about the same person before I try and defend somebody, because it might be a totally different person. Does that make sense? People's definition, their view of God, often is based on all sorts of things. Could be a Channel 4 documentary, could just be pop culture, could be a bad church experience, all sorts of things. Is it the Bible? Is it Jesus? What can we do there? And just lastly, there's this little tool. It's called the conversation quadrant. You see that okay? Just about. I want to end with this. This is what we often do. So casual conversations, that's where we all start. Think about the cleaner in your workplace. If you're in a school, think about little interactions with staff. Often all of our conversations start quite casual. Sometimes they will move across to being meaningful. And those are moments where suddenly somebody shares something a bit deeper, more important about their life, and you almost notice it, like, oh, that's important to you. This now feels like we're in a different layer of conversation here. We're not just talking about the weather or different things. And I think most of us ping between casual and meaningful conversations. And the goal, or one of the goals, if we really believe like that Jesus is the good news for the world, is one of the goals is to help move into a spiritual conversation. To find the bridge that helps move you from a meaningful conversation to actually revealing someone's spiritual need, or to showing actually that this is what God has done for you, or in this area. Let me just give you an example. I cycle quite a lot, and for the last 4 years I've done it competitively, joined a club. So it means I've got a large group of acquaintances and a smaller group, or I'd now say friends, in my club. And because I'm doing this for a while now, and because it's actually my hobby, it's a thing that I actually enjoy, suddenly the stakes feel quite a bit higher in this area when I am going to have a go at sharing my faith. It's not like I'm just in Morrison's and the person's having a bad day and I think they're open and I might go, you know what, this might be a moment just to encourage this person with something. Because I'm not going to see that person probably again. I can go to a different checkout, The stakes are pretty low on that. If I get rejected, it doesn't matter all that much. But when this is something that I do, every week, and I actually know these people, and I'm going to continue no matter how the conversation goes, or at least I want to. I don't want to have to join another club. Suddenly the stakes feel a lot higher. And I found that for a while, that reality meant that I just moved between casual and meaningful, and back to casual, and back to meaningful. But that was where ultimately it stops, because I wasn't taking any risks, and I wasn't actually trying to advance the conversation further for all the reasons that we've already looked at, under the iceberg, above the iceberg. And then more recently, I think just through time, meeting their families, meeting their children, actually getting to know like the details of people's lives, I would say there's almost like something clicked. And God one night just really brought it to bear, the fact that I really care about these people, and he cares even more about these people. And I think as I got to know their families, and it wasn't just somebody with a helmet next to me who's helping me in a race, but actually I actually got to know them really well. And then I was like, man, like I can't keep doing this. Like I've got to find a way. God, you've got to help me find a way of moving these conversations on, because otherwise, what are we doing here? What am I doing? Like, this is enjoyable, but it's got to be more than enjoyable. Like, what's going on here? Like, God, help me to be obedient. And that's what I did, and there's been many little moments where I was able to do that. There was a period of time where we experienced some loss in our family, and I was off work for a little bit, and meant that I rode a bit more at that time, and they knew I was off work, and they asked me questions. And I immediately could go into meaningful quite easily, and I could share with them about what's happened in our family and the loss we've experienced and how painful it is. But am I going to build a bridge down and say, because that's not the end of the story. So when they say that must be really hard, I could say, yeah, but I have more to say, because God has met a need in my life that is way deeper. There's a strength he's given me, which is deeper. Am I going to join the dots and say, actually, this has really helped though. Let me share. Can I share a bit more? And with his help, I managed to do that on a few different occasions. And there's a few other examples. And I share that not to say, hey, look at me, I'm doing it really well. That was often what I did. And with God's help, time and time again, I gradually am able to move deeper. Like, just have a bit of a think about your interactions and conversations. Are you able to do the same? Are you able to move down into spiritual? And then hopefully the next step is discovery, where they discover for themselves who God really is, and that he also has the power to change their life too. I think for time, what do you think, Matt? Should we let these guys off their homework and they can do this draw and get another time? Let's do it. Okay, Matt wants to do it. Let's do it. So here you go. Get it out. Oh, I need to turn this around. Yeah. Okay. So get your paper out. Turn it over, please. Apologies. Turn your bits of paper over and have a go. Have a go at drawing it. What is the church? Can you draw those symbols? As you start moving your conversations from casual to meaningful to spiritual to discovery conversations, this little diagram may help you along the way. See if you can draw it out.